When you work in education leadership, you don't get off at 5 o'clock. Your mind is always on the clock, thinking of ways to solve problems for your students, parents, and teachers. On the Clock is your go-to podcast to learn valuable insights from education leaders across the United States. I'm your host, Todd Dallas Lamb, former White House appointee to the U.S. Department of Education, and we are now on the clock.
Welcome back to On the Clock with Todd Dallas Lamb. I am your host. Today, we have a bit of a different show. For those of you who have listened to On the Clock for the last few years, we thank you. We started this show in an effort to actually talk to superintendents at the very beginning of the pandemic who were dealing with school closures and all of the complications that went into how you educate students from outside the classroom. And that has been an incredibly engaging conversation, and it's morphed into many, many topics. We've done 50 or 60 shows now. And recently I was having a conversation about the after effects of the shutdown. And they're pretty well known now, and they go like this. We shut down schools, we put kids in the home, we tried to educate them as best we could through the computer. And now we have three things that are really haunting American education in this country. And one of them, is obviously learning loss. Everybody concedes that the assessment scores are much lower than they were before the pandemic. And then mental health, which we've done 3 episodes on mental health on this show. 51% suicidal ideation amongst adolescent girls. And I've never seen a topic rise more quickly in K-12 education than mental health has. And then chronic absenteeism. It might surprise people to know, the New York Times recently reported that in 2022, there are 75 million students in America, and in 2022, 14.7 million were chronically absent in American education. And I was talking to somebody really smart on the topic, a woman by the name of Kathy Lane here in Annapolis, who is a lifetime educator. And she said that this really boils down to engagement. And it makes sense, right? If you're not going to school, there's something that isn't drawing you to school. And for me, it was a number of things. And one of the areas of education that I have really thought has been lacking, and I looked up the Los Angeles Times reported recently that half of the arts teachers in Los Angeles Unified School District were fired in 2009, and it hasn't gotten any better, and it's the same way across the state, and I think probably very similar across the country. So I thought, let's talk to somebody who might know a little something about the arts, and I decided to call my old friend Billy Bob Thornton, award-winning actor, writer, director, songwriter. Billy, thank you for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me on your show. Good to see you, Todd.
It's great to see you, and I really appreciate you joining this conversation, and I think it's important. I'm sorry for the long introduction, but I felt like it was worthy of explaining it a little bit. So I met you at a little place called Harry Brown's in Annapolis 4 years ago, and the thing that I came away with was just how interesting you are. Somebody once told me, don't ever meet your hero because they'll always disappoint you. You actually went the complete other way. And I'll tell you why. It wasn't just because you're an actor and you've been in some of my favorite films. It was because you talked, in an hour, we talked about baseball. We talked about friendships. You have some incredible friendships around the country. We talked about your love of baseball, and you started out in high school. That's where you thought you were going, wasn't it? Was you going to be a baseball player?
Well, I thought it was going to be either in a rock and roll band or baseball because those were the two things I did. I started at 9 years old having a band and played ball from the time I was able to throw any kind of ball. And my dad was a high school basketball coach and a history teacher. And my mom had been an English major in college. And so it was a pretty interesting life. And my dad was an old school coach. I mean, he was more like the Bear Bryant, Bobby Knight kind of guy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Baseball was the thing for me. Baseball and music were the things for me that elevated me in terms of my social life because I was sort of an outsider. I was raised in a tiny little town called Alpine, Arkansas. I had 110 people. And when we moved into Malvern, Arkansas, it had about 9,500 people. So for us, that was a city. And so I was just known as the country kid who had moved to town and, wasn't part of the clique until all of a sudden my band was playing at the proms and the college parties and things like that. And until I became one of the local baseball heroes, and for some reason.
All right, so I got a million questions now. Who was your influence in music?
Well, I mean, I saw the Beatles when I was 8 years. Yeah, I mean, I watched Ed Sullivan and saw them in 1964 on Ed Sullivan, and I already was an Elvis fan. But so the bar for me as a musician was set so high with Elvis and then the Beatles and the whole British invasion that I think it did me some good because I grew up in the heyday of rock and roll. So when the bar is set that high, it's something you're never going to reach, but you keep trying. So I think I was born with it to an extent, but also just the things that I was trying to achieve were so unreachable. And I'm not saying actually unreachable, but I mean, there's a lot of difference in, wanting to be in the Beatles or wanting to be Bob Gibson and just wanting to be some guy.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that, in other words, I was driven. And I think to this day, I look at everything I do, whether it's making a record or touring in front of live audiences, which is how we met, and or making a movie, writing, any of it. I still look at it like I'm in a garage band or I'm on the senior Babe Ruth baseball team. I mean, I still try to be 19 all the time and look at everything as being ahead of me, because I think one of the things that kills people inside is when they stop dreaming. So if your dreams are alive, you're alive. And so I don't look at it like, oh, I did all this great stuff over the years or whatever it is, or look at all the things I did. I just try to act like I didn't do them, and I'm still trying to make it, and I think that keeps you alive and keeps you driven.
What was it about baseball? What did you grow up? Who were your idols in baseball? What drew you to that sport?
Well, anybody in Arkansas was a St. Louis Cardinal fan. So,
right.
And it's, all the other teams can have an ironic thing about bleeding something. I bleed Dodger blue. Whatever. I bleed whatever colors those are the Padres and the A's wear. I don't know. But with the Cardinals, you just have to say I bleed Cardinal red. But everybody there, because in Arkansas we had no professional teams of any kind. So, and St. Louis was the closest, and their farm club was the Arkansas Travelers in Little Rock. So we saw a lot of the Cardinals come through there on their way up. And so the guys that my early heroes were, Bob Gibson, Musial, which I was too young really to see Musial play, but on TV, but that whole 60s Cardinal team I was wild about. And so as a pitcher, I was a junk pitcher. So I loved the pitchers, and Gibson was hard to beat, and I've asked some big hitters before, I always ask them questions like, who were you afraid to hit against? And he said, I was talking to Willie McCovey. Got to sit in his box.
San Francisco Giants.
In Cisco, yeah. And so I asked him, I said, who did you just not want to go up to the plate against? He said, well, I'm not going to count Gibson because nobody wanted to go up to the plate against him.
He's not special.
Yeah. He said Sandy Koufax would have been the one that just had his number, And so I loved all those guys. And even though I was a Cardinal fan, I still admired and appreciated, pitchers and players in general on other teams too. My American League team was Baltimore. And
oh, really? That's right.
a lot of
I remember
people
that.
in
Yeah.
Arkansas, yeah. A lot of people in Arkansas love the Orioles for their American League team because Brooks Robinson was from Little Rock.
I recently saw Brooks Robinson is one of the most beloved Orioles. I would say maybe behind Cal Ripken Jr., who still lives here in the area and is truly one of the most beloved as well. But talk to me about you're in high school. You got a little rock band thing going. That's cool. And you're a baseball player. That's cool. How did you as I was talking, and I have to do a little shout out to your boy, JD Andrew, your partner in music, and I'm guessing some other endeavors as well. And he's been so good about helping us put this call together. What was it that happened to you in high school that kind of gave acting a look at least?
Well, I was never encouraged that much by anybody. You know, like I said, my dad was a tough coach. And so, you know, I remember pitching a game when I was 16 in high school where I struck out 13 batters and I shut them out 2-0. And I said something to my dad about it. I said, see, that's pretty awesome, right? And he said,
I know exactly where this is going.
He said something to the effect of, not quite good enough, should have been 16 strikeouts. I mean, you know, he was that kind of guy.
Yep.
So when I was in high school, they had a drama program. So you could take some of these kind of other things that weren't science and math and all that. And I wasn't a good student because I didn't know it at the time, but I'm severely dyslexic and have obsessive compulsive disorder and all these different, and an anxiety disorder.
Yep.
So I grew up with a learning disability, but back then they didn't have programs, you know, for stuff. No. They didn't have names for anything, so we didn't know. I was just known as the dumb guy. But one way or the other, this drama class, I thought, I'll go in there because, you know, there's girls in there and stuff like that. And mostly, yes. And otherwise, it's like I wasn't going to take home ec because my friends would have never let me live that down. And I didn't want to really do shop, you know, because I ended up working in things that were like shop anyway after I graduated. But anyway, in that drama class, there was a woman named Maudie Treadway, and she was the first person to give me encouragement. And the way it happened was I used to sit and write short stories in class. She would be teaching us about different things, and the students would get on a little stage and we would do things. And then they had 2 plays a year, you know, bigger plays. And it just started as a lark for me, or just kind of a thing. It's like, maybe I'll actually get a good grade in this, you know, it's just talking, right? And so anyway, I would sit there and write these short stories. And one day Miss Treadway said, what are you doing? And I said, well, nothing. I'm just kind of, you know, listening to you, which wasn't true. And she said, let me see that. And she takes it up there and she reads it and she says, so you're writing, what is this, some kind of play you're writing? I said, well, it's just a little short story I goof off with, you know, doing that. I said, I was always interested in characters and I like to write funny things about characters. And it was literally a story. I remember the story. It was a story about an old man and old woman shopping in Kmart. And it was like for them, it was like going to a Who concert, you know, Kmart. And
what? Mind blown.
Right, exactly. But it was a funny thing, you know, about them. And anyway, she reads it and she says, okay, if you're so bright, why don't you finish this up, make it into a play where the dialogue works as a play, and I'm going to let you direct it and you pick the cast from the people here. So I did. And they put it on. And then Miss Treadway came to me one day and she said, I've never had a student in here who I thought could actually do this for a living someday. I think you can.
Wow. That's
And
incredible.
we got very close, and she was almost like a counselor to me or something, because she gave me some hope that I had some kind of thing that I could do, like a talent of some kind. And she encouraged me, and I actually ended up being a pallbearer at her funeral later on. And she was the first one, and then the second person who encouraged me was a guy named John Whitlock after I'd moved to LA and accidentally got in his acting class. And that's a story that it's too long to tell on this podcast, but one of these days I'll tell it to you because it's pretty astoundingly crazy.
I can't wait. It really is incredible the impact people can have on a young person, isn't it? Like, I think you just hit it on the head. Like, when you're 15, 16 years old, you're old enough to start to look towards the horizon and see that I got to figure out what to do, but you're really baffled. And in my case, I was baffled as to what the hell I was going to do, right? Like, to have somebody tell you, I think you can do this, you're the best I've ever seen do this, that I've come through here. And then I have to ask, did Miss Treadway,
yeah.
did she ever see your success? Like, was she able to see that at some point and have that satisfaction?
She never saw it.
Yeah. Well, she saw it before any of us saw it. That's for sure. When we were talking, and I mentioned earlier, one of the things that really touched me about you is your friendships. And I think I'm famous in Annapolis for asking you the dumbest question that anybody's probably asked you, which is, hey, weren't you married to somebody famous once? I actually asked that. And and you said, yeah. And she's, Angie is still one of my very, very dear friends. And I'm really proud of that. And I was like, wow, friendship really matters. And then about 10 minutes later, I was asking you about Sling Blade. And I'm a huge country music fan of country music. My parents are also, my mom's from Arkansas, a little county called Jackson County in Arkansas. And I dearly want to go visit Arkansas. It's one of the only two states I've never been to, which would be Arkansas and Alaska. And I mentioned to you, I've always wondered, and it's one of my favorite movies, Sling Blade, why in the hell, how did you find Dwight Yoakam? Because, first of all, I'm a huge Dwight Yoakam fan of his singing, and then he's incredible in the movie that you made. You produced, wrote, won an Academy Award for Sling Blade, and I asked you, how did you find Dwight Yoakam? And you said, and I quote, because he's probably one of my best friends, and friendship matters to you, doesn't it? Friendship is really something that really you really care about it, don't you?
Absolutely. One of the guys in a band I played in high school passed away last week. And it hit me so hard, even though I haven't seen the guy in, probably 12, 14 years.
Yep.
But I kept up with him, and it just felt like the end of an era to me. It was pretty devastating. And, Dwight and JD and a handful of other guys are my close friends. And I don't really, I have a lot of friends from the old days, you know what I mean? And people that I came up with out here in LA. I don't hang out with a bunch of famous people. Dwight, I see Dennis Quaid every now and then.
Yeah.
And
that's gotta be fun.
Yeah. And those guys, probably more musicians than actors, but I barely hang out with actors. But friendship is that's what keeps you going, really. If you don't have anybody to bounce things off of and people to talk about things that are where you have similarities and the same hopes and dreams and things like that, it kind of leaves your life empty,
I get back to the original point of our conversation. Like, I went to school for as much as anything to go hang out with my buddies that were at school. And you probably were better at it than I was. I liked girls, but I didn't know how to talk to them very well. But I didn't mind like chatting with my buddies about the ones I liked. You know what I mean? I loved the friendships that I built, and I still maintain those relationships. And it's yet another thing that schools could probably do better at is how do we engage students in positive relationships, because they can be a lifetime reward if you'll allow it as a person and as a system.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not saying that science and math and all these subjects in school are not important. They're obviously important, but it's not like, you go hang out with your buddies and, talk about algebra much, I mean, it's like
Yeah.
you hang out with them and talk about music and movies and sports and, things like
Yep.
that. That's what you talk
Yep.
about. And the thing, to bring it back to what you were talking to me earlier about, I think that's probably the most important social aspect of school is arts, arts and entertainment. I think that's because it's something that everybody is interested in. So if you have a subject, and when I was coming up in school, yeah, sure, you had the odd class here or two, that had to do with the arts, but it was like reading, writing, and arithmetic. And I think these days, one thing they're doing the right way is there are options for schools that encourage a more free curriculum.
Yeah.
We've been taking our daughter around to colleges. She's 19, and we've taken her to Cal Arts, out here, and UCLA, different schools, and she's interested in science and nature and creative writing, and that's what she wants to do.
That's
And
great.
so there are schools around the country that actually, up in college, for sure, where they can actually encourage that kind of stuff, But in the public schools, you're just regular school. A lot of times, that's the low subject on the totem pole. And I think, for me anyway, the two most important things you can learn in school or be involved in school are the arts and history. I think history is one of the things that we've lost also.
Yeah.
I mean, when we
Couldn't
were
agree more.
growing up, history went way back. Like, even though here I am like in, say, 1973, and I'm listening to Deep Purple and the Allman Brothers and people like that, I still knew Jimmy Rogers and Billie Holiday
Yeah.
and Hank Williams and all this kind of stuff. And now I think kids' histories they're not going back as far. Now it's like you have to tell them Ozzy Osbourne's not just a guy on a reality show. He was in a band called Black Sabbath before any of this happened.
Yeah. I turned both my sons on to Merle Haggard, Hank Williams, and his son, Hank Williams Jr. And there's a new breed of cat in country music now with Morgan Wallen, Tyler Childers, and now they're playing me songs, and it's pretty legit. I mean, I think there's a new wave, and I'll circle back to your buddy Dwight. I still may come home at night, and after everybody goes to bed, I might pour a bourbon and watch the Ken Burns special on country music. And when
Right.
Dwight Yoakam chokes up, I kind of lose it every single time. That guy
Right.
is so good on that show. It might be one of his great historic contributions
Right.
in country music, other than his amazing music that he's made and the work he did on your
Right.
movie. But I think history. We've done a show recently on trying to teach the context of history that judging 1850 with through the eyes and the prism of 2023 it needs some instruction and some thought before we actually do that. So Billy, what's going on with you right now? I know right now if anybody hasn't seen 1883, it's one of the most electrifying performances I've seen. I love the whole movie. The acting is great. We've talked about some country music singers. There's a couple of country music singers in there that I didn't see this coming, how wonderful actors they were. But they're incredible in that, and the story is amazing, and the whole series just blew me away. You're also in Goliath, and people are raving about that. What else are you doing? What's going on with you right now? And then I want to finally talk about How I Met You, which is how can people find Billy Bob and the Boxmasters, your band?
Well, what's happening with me now is we're frantically packing to leave for Texas on Monday. I'm
Dallas
going
or where?
well, yeah, the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so I'm going to be starring in Taylor Sheridan's new series called Landman. And it's about the oil business in Texas, out around Odessa out there. So it shows the good, the bad, and the ugly of the oil business, and just the relationships and what it takes to work in that. It's written so well that normally I read a script and I go, well, let's see, I'll change that and I'll change that. But
Yeah.
in this one, there's not much to change. Taylor is a wonderful writer, and I loved working with him in 1983, and it's been really, really good.
What year is it set in?
It's current day.
Okay.
The actual story it was based on was a podcast called Boomtown.
Jeez.
And it took place in like the, sort of early to mid 2000s. So I don't have to wear a powdered wig or anything, but one way or the other. So I go and do that through the end of May, and then have a couple of months off, and then the band goes back on tour, the Boxmasters, and we start rehearsing in late August, and we go out September through October, so 2 solid months in there of U.S. and Canada.
And the band is described, as I've sort of read a few things, is sort of classic, the rock and roll you grew up with, Beatles, Rolling Stones, with kind of a country vibe to it. Is that a fair overview of the band's style?
Well, they usually add that country thing in there, I think, because of our first couple of albums, and also maybe some of my earlier solo albums. We're really, just an original rock and roll band. It's all original material, and we have a great fan base. We sound like guys who grew up loving the Beatles and the Byrds and the Kinks and the Animals. Yeah,
that's
essentially.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, enjoy Dallas. I can't thank you enough. I think you might be one of the more famous people we've had on this show. Wait a minute. You're absolutely the most famous person we've ever had on the show. Thank you so much. I can't wait to see you and have a beer with you next time we're at Harry Brown's. And I know JD will let me know, and we'll get together. And maybe I'll make you some barbecue next time, and some guacamole. I know you're an avocado guy.
Oh, yes, I am. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Todd. It was great talking. I mean, I could talk to you for another hour about this stuff because it's pretty important stuff,
Billy Bob Thornton, you are the hero that I met that did not disappoint me. I really appreciate you being on the show. The topic of engaging students, there's many pathways, and one of them is certainly the arts, and who better than you to help us walk through your history in that endeavor. I can't thank you enough. Have a great rest of your weekend, and we will talk soon, my friend.
Well, thank you, Todd. Thanks for talking to me, and I'll see you down the road here.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe to our YouTube channel and find us on your favorite podcast platform. On the Clock is part of the Strategos Podcast Network. To view the entire lineup of shows, please visit us at strategosgroup.com. See you next time.